We come from different walks of life and follow different paths, pursue different professions, practice different traditions. We are different. Yet one thing unites us. We are Americans. We are the Sumners Foundation, developing a network of thought leaders around the founding ideals of self-governance by funding scholarships and investing in programs that educate and engage Americans. The Sumners Foundation, on the job since 1949.
Good afternoon. Is this on? Okay, good. Good afternoon. My name is Lon Williams, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Sumners Foundation. And on behalf of the Foundation, I want to welcome you to Strengthening Democracy Through Civil Dialogue discussion. Too often these days, we do not listen to opposing sides. We tend to dismiss them based upon emotion or our unfortunate human tendency to go along with whatever the crowd or tribe we belong to. Groupthink, if you will. Our nation will not survive if we continue to disregard the opinions of others, no matter how outrageous they may seem on the surface. We must interact with each other and debate the merits of our positions to seek the ultimate truth without demonizing or canceling the opinions on the other side. It is all of our duties as citizens. And that's the reason why the Sumners Foundation is sponsoring today's program. We were founded by Congressman Hatton Sumners, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from the 5th District of Texas for over 35 years. He was a fervent believer in our founding principles, in our system of checks and balances, and in the separation of powers. He probably is best known for his efforts as chairman of the House Judiciary Committee in stopping President Roosevelt's efforts to increase the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. He informed Roosevelt to his face that he would not only not support the president's legislation, but that he would actively and publicly campaign against its passage. Congressman Sumners had been frequently mentioned on the short list of potential nominees for the Supreme Court. He knew that his decision would be the end of any positive relationship that he might have had with President Roosevelt and any opportunity he had to become a justice on the Supreme Court. Yet he placed his beliefs above his ambitions. After his voluntary retirement from Congress in 1947, he established the Sumners Foundation and crafted the foundation's purpose, which is to encourage the study and teaching of the art and science of self-government so that the American people can understand the fundamental principles of democracy and be guided by those principles in shaping governmental policies. For decades, the Foundation has provided scholarships to all parts of American society, including those who are economically disadvantaged, those who have been subjected to historical discrimination because of their race, creed, gender, or beliefs. Our scholarships originally were geared toward students at SMU Law School and Oklahoma City University Law School, and towards numerous specific undergraduate colleges throughout Texas. Recently, we've expanded our scholarships to include undergraduate students at large, including all colleges and universities throughout the Southwest. In fact, we have at least one Sumner Scholars here today. Harmon, why don't you wave? There's one right there. She came all the way down from Oklahoma. Now, even though the foundation is known for those scholarships, as our financial wherewithal has grown over the years, we have been able to significantly expand our reach, and we have increased our support for numerous nonpartisan programs and projects which are committed to enhancing our American democracy. For example, the Foundation supports programs and activities that provide personal involvement in the political process, i.e. voting and the functions of government, such as democracy reform, mock trials, civic engagement programs, mock legislative sessions, as well as conferences and seminars on relevant public policy issues, such as we are doing today with the LBJ School. Further examples of our grant recipients include YMCA Youth and Government Program, the Future Farmers programs to involve farmers in the youth in government programs, Boys and Girls State, which is held every year here in Austin, the Texas Citizen Bee, which is a sort of a trivia competition for high school students about how much they know or think they know about the American experience. We also sponsor and have for years the State Bar of Texas programs on American founding principles and the United States Constitution. We sponsor the Fund for American Studies out of Washington, D.C., as well as the United States Association for Former Members of Congress. Now, during today's program, we believe it is critical that you all reflect on our fundamental principles, which were crafted by our founders after open, rigorous, and free debate, and that you all recommit yourselves to the concept of freedom for yourself and for others as you discuss and consider matters relating to voting, which are brought before you today. We hope very much that you find this program worthwhile, and we are very pleased to have sponsored it. Thank you.
Actually, I don't need this. All right. Thank you, Lon, for that, for your remarks and for supporting this event. Okay, good afternoon. Let's get some excitement here, folks. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, thank you. It's really a privilege and pleasure to be here today and introduce the moderator for this panel. My name is Faniel Joseph, and I'm the Associate Dean for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or JEDI, at the LBJ School. And I'm also the Barbara Jordan Chair in Political Values and Ethics, and the founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, and a professor of history here at the University of Texas at Austin. Today's important conversation is part of the LBJ School's signature event series, Strengthening Democracy, here titled Strengthening Democracy Through Civil Dialogues, a key initiative of LBJ's new JEDI office. We believe that strengthening democracy through civil dialogues preserves freedom for all people to enter the civic arena in ways that cultivate respectful, constructive, and thought-provoking dialogues that will inspire our community to better initiate policy solutions for the greater good. Our intention is to introduce our community of students, faculty, staff, and alumni to a series of speakers who can challenge us to grow in new and unexpected ways so we can better face the challenges and opportunities facing our democracy now and in the future. Thank you again to the Sumner's Foundation for their partnership on this essential programming. We believe that programming like this is what the LBJ School is intended to do, to convene a wide array of perspectives on a number of pressing issues. So that means the issues that we're facing today are all issues related to democracy, whether we're thinking about voting rights today or issues of trans people, issues of immigration, issues of racial justice and equity. And we're committed to really talking about these issues in ways that will enrich the conversation and provide deep perspective and contextualization for our students, our faculty, our staff, and our community members. Speaking of community members, I want to give a shout out to Councilwoman Vanessa Fuentes, who's here. Thank you for being here. Is she here? Still here? She just had to step out. Okay, so let me know when she comes back, please. Much has occurred recently in Texas and across the nation when it comes to the topic of voting rights, voter access, and voter integrity. And in our current climate of polarization, many are seeking to anticipate how current and potential policy reforms may impact the interplay of voter access and voter integrity. Some believe reforms are too restrictive and limit democracy, while others believe reforms restore democratic principles. However, many believe voting has become politicized and think our leaders need to frame and work towards nonpartisan voting solutions. This is what we will be exploring today as we examine the future of voting. Today's panel is being moderated by the incomparable Jennifer Rice. Jen Rice is a reporter for the Houston Chronicle covering Harris County government. Before that, Jen spent 3 years covering City Hall for Houston's NPR station, where she reported on topics that included voting rights and housing. Her reporting has aired nationally on NPR's Morning Edition, one of my faves, All Things Considered, another fave, and Here and Now. Wow, that's a trifecta, another fave. A native Houstonian, Jen graduated from Barnard College at Columbia University, and the most important degree is a master's degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs in 2018. So thank you. So Jen Rice.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I want to welcome all of you, and I also want to welcome everyone who is watching and live streaming from home or from work. Really excited to be here with you guys today. It's awesome to get the chance to meet the new dean and to meet Lon with the Sumner's Foundation, who has some really cool stories. So it was awesome to get to meet you today. And I want to thank Esteban, who is my former classmate at LBJ. Thank you so much for coordinating this whole event today. Yeah, so I'm excited to introduce you guys to James and Richard. I'm really glad I've gotten the chance to meet you guys, and excited to tell everyone about you two. So James Slattery serves as a senior staff attorney with the Voting Rights Program at the Texas Civil Rights Project, leading the organization's election protection efforts during the 2020 election and voting rights advocacy during the 2021 Texas legislative session. Previously, he also led TCRP's initiative to boost high school voter registration rates in Texas and to encourage voting and civic participation by young voters. Slattery originally came to Texas as Deputy Voter Protection Director for the Wendy Davis campaign in 2014, and he worked on voting rights issues on President Barack Obama's 2012 campaign. He also served in the Obama administration as Director of the Office of the Executive Secretariat at the U.S. Department of Commerce. That was a lot of words. Slattery practiced law as an associate attorney at Wiley Rain LLP from 2007 to 2012, and he served as a law clerk for a U.S. District Court and U.S. Court of Appeals judge from 2005 to 2007. He graduated from Pepperdine University School of Law, and he has a BA from Lipscomb University. That's James.
Thanks.
And sitting next to me, Dr. Richard Johnson. He is the director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Booker T. Washington Initiative, which examines the effects of public policy on African American communities. Prior to joining TPPF, Johnson served as a chief of staff in both municipal and state governments. As chief of staff for a Houston City Council member, he played a significant role in drafting and navigating policies related to public safety, public works, and housing and community development. During the 85th and 86th Texas legislatures, he served as chief of staff and senior policy analyst for a House member and worked on education, public safety, healthcare, and workforce development legislation. That's a lot. Johnson served as the co-founder and second president of 100 Black Men Metropolitan Houston, vice president of development for 100 Black Men San Antonio, and co-chair of the education committee of the NAACP in Houston. A Texas native, Johnson has an EDD in Education Administration, and an MA in Clinical Psychology from Texas Southern University, and a BA in History and Government from Wiley College. Please congratulate him and welcome here today. Okay, so just to start off with you guys, hoping that you can introduce yourselves a little bit and tell everyone sort of how you came into these roles and sort of, what was the pull toward getting involved in voting issues, kind of, where did this come from? And if you want to talk about, any personal or family experiences with voting that kind of sparked the interest for you, but no need to if you don't want to, just kind of opening the floor to kind of introduce yourselves.
Richard, do you want to? Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having us. This is quite an honor to be here to speak with you guys. So, when I've tried to think back about my own Spider-Man origin story, it has been kind of hard because I can't give you like, oh, there was this one traumatic event that happened when I was whatever, and like Bruce Wayne, and that made me become, something. But when I've tried to think back, because my parents didn't go to college, so it's not like I came from a family of lawyers or white-collar professionals. Politics was discussed kind of at the dinner table, just in terms of like, hey, this thing is going on in the world, But I didn't come from a political family. But I think a lot of things kind of happened. One was the 1992 election. I was 11 years old. And, at the time, people thought that was an exciting election, if only we knew. But you had an incumbent president who was both a wartime hero and a wartime president, receiving a strong challenge from the most talented politician of his generation and the strongest third-party candidate in 80 years, who, the stars had aligned differently, might have really won. And so that election was just so interesting and absorbing that, I couldn't help but continue to follow politics after that. And of course, the 1990s, some people now look back on it as some kind of like golden age of bipartisanship, and didn't things really work back then? But it did not seem that way at the time. So, I think that happened. I also think my mom was a particularly important factor here. So she emigrated from West Germany, and I emphasize that very deliberately, when she was 18 years old, although she was born in Afghanistan in 1957 and lived there until she was 13. And so living in those countries, American democracy, particularly in that era, was not merely a model, but it was the thing that in Germany in particular, people thought American democracy had liberated them and protected them from the Russians. So I think just that background cliche that, well, if you want to do public service or civil rights or whatever, you go to law school. And I did, but I don't really give you a manual when you go to law school of, if you don't want to practice law at a law firm, well, what do you do? And so I kind of bumbled around a little bit for a while. I practiced corporate law for a while. And then 10 years ago, I was a legal volunteer on the Obama campaign, writing memos for how to get them on the ballot in various states. And I eventually joined their team as part of the ballot access team to get the campaign on the ballot. From there, went into helping voters directly as a member of a series of campaigns. And then after 2016, coming back to Texas and fighting the good fight down here.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I do have kind of a Spider-Man moment. You know, I think back to what first got to me was, I was about 7.5, and I don't know if you guys can remember, there's always these serious events that happen in life that basically you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when this thing happened. So when Martin Luther King was shot and killed, I was 7.5 years old. I was in the front yard playing, and my mom came outside with my friends. My mom came outside and said, "You come in the house and you boys go home." Mm-hmm. And she put me in front of the television and said, and the news reporter said, "Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has just been killed." And from that point on, I grew up in Houston, born in Fifth Ward, which is an all African-American community. Pleasantville is an all Black community right down the street. And I can remember the next voting opportunity. We were always strong participators in voting because my family was a part of the movement and the civil rights movement. And so I started working at the polls at the age of 8, passing out flyers and engaged. Everybody in our family was engaged in voting. So fast forward, went on to college, and I went to a historically Black college, Wiley College, which I don't know if you've seen the movie The Great Debaters with Denzel. You know, James Former was an alumnus of Wiley College, and James Former was the founder of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he's also the founder of CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality. He was the speaker at my commencement graduation. James Former reached out to me, he shook my hand, he says, "Now it's your turn to go and make a difference." He was a part of the Big Four: James Former, Shuttlesworth, King, and Roy Wilkins. And so I've always been, for the longest, a part of the civil rights movement and a part of the issues facing the African-American community in terms of making the world a better place, for as far back as I can remember. And so fast forward on, I went to the military and came out of the military and went to Texas Southern University. At that time, drugs was ravishing our communities in the Fifth Ward area, inner city Houston. And from that point, I told my mom, one thing I learned in the military, I said, you can get anything done if you know the right people and you know how, and you know the rules. So I said, I need to know the right people. Say, well, a friend of yours around there, he's about 13 years older than me. He was running for state representative at the time. I said, go help him. So I walked in, I said, look, you don't have to pay me anything. You know, I just want to learn how to engage the process. I've been passing out leaflets and all of that stuff. I want to learn more about the mechanics, and that's my pay, to learn more about the mechanics. And so I had brought my military skills to his campaign. They had some signs in the corner filled with, you know, all disorganized. So I went over, I organized the sign corner, created the assembly line, then I organized the phone bank. He didn't win the election, but next time he said, hey man, I want to run for city council. Would you manage my campaign? You do it better than anybody. I said, yeah. So I managed the campaign and we unseated a 16-year incumbent. And he said, well, look, I don't know much about city government, but we go learn together. You be the chief of staff, I'll be the council member. I said, okay, good, so, and so went down and one of the things and they were so upset because we had won unseated 16-year incumbent, they erased everything on the computers. So we came in, I'll say, that's politics. You come in here with nothing. But I was okay, because in the Army, you go from duty station to duty station, and the first thing you do is you learn that new duty station. But the first thing I told Mike, I said, look, the first thing we need to do is go to the finance department. He said, why is that? I said, well, when I leave from one duty station to the next duty station, the Army told me, first thing you do, follow the money. Go to the finance department. So you go to the finance department, you can learn everything. So I said, so that this never happens, let's start an internship program in our office. So we started an internship program to teach young Black males about local government and get firsthand experience in local government. So later on, fast forward, I get a call from one of our interns, previous interns, Jarvis Johnson, and he said, look, Sylvester Turner's decided to run for mayor, and I need you to manage my campaign. I'm gonna run for his seat as a state rep. I said, okay, Jarvis. So I managed Jarvis's campaign, and we won that campaign. He said, look, I don't know anything about the legislature. Why don't we go there and you be my chief of staff? And we learned together. And by that time, I had my doctorate degree and used to a lot of research. So I said, look, we want to do something different that I have not seen people do. We want you to pass some bills into law that really impact our community. I said, so the first thing we need to do is we need to find some research people here in Austin. So I went to, and they break themselves up, liberal think tank, conservative think tank. So I first went to the liberal think tank, and it was about 20 miles away from the Capitol on the second floor of a little storefront. And they had about 2 people with a doctorate degree, and the other folks there were master's degree and below. And I posed some questions to them about some issues in the African American community and how they could help me, write a bill. They said, well, no, we don't have the resources for that. If you want to find that information out, you're gonna have to go to Texas Public Policy Foundation. I said, who are they? And they said, TPPF, you're gonna have to go find those guys if you want to get that information. I said, where are they? They didn't tell me. So when I went back to my office in the Capitol, one old guy was passing out white papers, and it had a lot of data on it, and he put it on my desk and was leaving out the door. I said, wait a minute, this has a lot of data on it, good information. I say, and I saw Texas Public Policy Foundation on the top of it. I say, are you from Texas Public Policy Foundation? He says, yes. I say, where are they? He said, if you go out the south door, they're about a block down on the left. I say, do they have a team of doctors in education? Because that's where the representative wanted to write education policy. He said, yeah. So he set me up a meeting. We sat down and wrote some Texas workforce and education policy. We didn't know that there was not an information infrastructure, bringing those 2 agencies together for the state of Texas. We didn't know that. We wrote that, and it was a bipartisan bill, passed unanimously out of the House, unanimously out of the Senate, went straight to the governor's desk. And my state rep, who used to be my intern, got his first bill signed into law. And so we experienced firsthand how, if you work with folks who can provide you with information, the right information, you could impact your community on the ground with policies that really help move them forward. So that's how I got involved into politics, and that's how I got involved in the voting rights, and that's how I got involved into where I am now with Texas Public Policy Foundation.
Thank you. These 2 guys have a lot of experience between them, and I'm really excited to kind of get into this conversation with both of you. And also we're going to be taking questions from all of you guys too, so kind of work on those questions, like get those going, because we need to hear from you too. So starting off with kind of a big question, but as a reporter, I'm often wondering, about our responsibility in the media and how we frame issues. We're sort of sometimes like a go-between between policymakers and the public, and I do kind of feel that responsibility heavily in terms of framing. And one thing I think we've all seen a lot of is that voting is often framed as a very political situation. Republicans are doing this, Democrats are doing this. And, I'd love to know from both of you if you think there's any way we could ever kind of work toward depoliticizing the act of voting and help people to kind of talk about voting as more of a civic issue, a nonpartisan issue, just kind of what we do as people who live in a community together. And also from both of your organizations' perspectives, if that's sort of kind of on your agenda in the long term, working on ways to depoliticize voting. And do you want to start, James?
Sure. So I think as a good lawyer, my answer is yes and no. So I think, and I'm going to do a thing that lawyers in law school you're told not to do, which is fight the question. The act of voting in this country has never been depolitical or unpolitical, right? Going back to the founding of this country, it has been an issue of who gets to vote and when and where and how. When the country was founded, the choice was made to only allow white property male owners to vote. And that's a political decision. So from the beginning, and then after the Civil War, when again, it took 100 years after the Civil War for the franchise to be expanded first to women and then to non-white men. So the idea, which I think we all would like to believe, that there's been a golden age where who gets to vote and how was not political is just, I think, a myth. But in recent times, it has seemed to be bipartisan, that the right to vote is a good thing, it should be protected, people should be able to vote. And so even though I know it's kind of a cliche at this point, and I think you all probably know this, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its later reauthorizations were passed with overwhelming bipartisan margins. So I looked it up. In 1965, in the US House, the Voting Rights Act passed by 328 to 74. And that was 217 Democrats and 111 Republicans. Same in the Senate. Senate was 79 to 18 with 49 Democrats. And I think this is important. Democrats voted 49 yes, 17 no. Republicans were 30 yes and only 1 no. So you see, in recent times, this was bipartisan. And then, of course, in 2006, the last time the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized, in the Senate, it passed 98 to 0, 0 no votes. I personally think, you can pick a different point in time when that began to change again. I think it was the 2000 election, which I guess that's probably one epilogue in that origin story, is that the first time I got to vote was in 2000. And that was a total disaster of an election that I don't think this country has fully reckoned with or fully recognized how disastrous it was. And I think one reason it was such a disaster is that it made it appear that election administration rules could have a decisive outcome on election results. And therefore, manipulation of election administration rules could lead one party over another to win. And from that point in time, you have things like a Supreme Court decision in 2008 that it was ruling on an Indiana voter ID law, but the key ruling was that states do not need actual evidence of voter fraud to enact new voting restrictions. Merely the abstract concern about voter fraud could justify new voting restrictions. And from there, you've had the gutting of the Voting Rights Act and so on. In terms of looking towards the future, I took my post-primary vacation in a place called Death Valley, which I think is probably a good metaphor for sometimes how I feel about how we're doing as a democracy these days. But when I go on these trips, you're kind of like staring off into space for hours while you're driving. And I am concerned that voting rights has become a culture war issue, that it has become like abortion, LGBT rights, a bunch of other rights, where it is hard now to find common ground between people of opposing persuasions. That it is subject now to beliefs that people have that are either impossible or close to impossible to prove or disprove. How do I prove a negative that there is no widespread voter fraud in the country? Proving a negative has been a challenge since ancient times. I'm not sure that I am going to fix it. And I think another change is that when you look at those bipartisan vote totals, support and opposition to voting rights were both bipartisan. Now, just like every other issue, it has become polarized, where you have one political party that at least appears or is in reality the one in support of voting rights, and another party that at least appears, or perhaps, depending on how you feel, in reality is opposed to voting rights. And so that's kind of where I see everything. We are a nonpartisan organization. When we talk about voting rights, we emphasize that, look, if you want change in your community, if you want better roads or hospitals or schools or whatever it is that you want, participating in voting is the way in our system of government that you can get that done. That government works best when it reflects as many of us as possible. And particularly now, people died for this right, and people are currently dying in Eastern Europe for this right. And the least we can do is honor those sacrifices.
How do you feel about if there's any hope of ever depoliticizing the voting process?
Well, let's first start with voting rights. Voting rights, we'll all agree, voting rights are a civil right, And to many of us, it's a civic duty. Now, that's two different things. When I joined the military, we had certain duties. Duties are a must. For every American, obviously, voting is not necessarily a must in their minds, because if it was, we'd have 100% voting participation every time we went to the voting poll. And so not everybody see it as a civic duty, Now, but it is a right. And here's where we differ in terms of our perception of the partisan side of it. Because once you get beyond the fact that voting is a civil right and it is a civic duty, once you get beyond that, then partisanism, the pressures of that is built into the infrastructure of the voting apparatus. Because I can tell you, see, the first time that I voted was in 1979. And as I explained to you, the first time that I really got totally engaged in the voting process and working at the polls, and volunteering at the polls was in 1969, right after 1968, because that's when Dr. King was shot. So I've been involved in the process a very long time. So I don't necessarily see the grim side of things. I've seen our engagement, and let's get beyond the 52-ton elephant in the room, being a black man in America. When I first walked in, the first thing that everybody in here recognized me is that I'm a black man, right? That's the first thing. And then she read my bio. This one thing you can be for sure of. And so looking at the discrimination, looking at slavery, looking at discrimination, looking at Jim Crow laws, looking at everything that we've come through, when I look at voting going forward, I don't see a grim picture, because I've seen tougher days in America. I've seen real tough days in America. And we've come a very long way. Now, both parties I see, both Democrat and Republican parties, and those are the two major parties, both of them believe in voting rights. Both of them believe that voting is a civil right. Not one party disagrees with that. You know how I know? Because I've run on the ticket myself in both parties. I've run as a Republican and I've run as a Democrat. And I grew up as a Democrat. So I know what both parties believe. Now, here's where we kind of differ, is who should be able to vote and maintaining the integrity of the vote. That's where most of our sticking point is. And he's right, James is right. You know, Goodman, Swanner, and Cheney, they died. They died doing what? Trying to register people to vote. Martin Luther King died. Medgar Evers died. Bobby Kennedy, JFK. A lot of people died for what? To prove up the right to vote. At one point in our history, that's where we were. Where are we now? Are we still fighting for the right to vote? No. What we're doing now is making sure that we maintain the integrity of the vote, because they didn't die for nothing. They didn't die for people who basically are not citizens in America can vote. They died for American citizens to be able to vote. And being able to identify yourself as an American citizen is just basic. 89% of our voters agreed with voter ID. 89%, that's 90% of Americans agree with voter ID. And if you look at the percentages of that, most people believe that you should be able to provide identification, not just for voting in person, but also voting by mail. Because remember, what we want to do is we're in the protection phase of the integrity of voting. Nobody's now fighting against voting rights. That's not the fight of today. The fight of today is protecting the integrity of the vote, making sure that folks who are really eligible to vote are the ones who are actually voting, and making sure that voters, when they get in their senior years, their golden years, are not being taken advantage of. And I've seen it happen in our communities. And sometimes individuals, you take precinct 259 in Houston, in Harris County. That's my precinct. I grew up there. We used to started out all black precinct, now it's 70% African American and about 30% Hispanic. If you go back into the 60s, we used to vote 100%. Then it went down into the 90s. We used to get sick about hearing our voter turnout is down into the 90s in our precinct. Well, now it's down into the 20s. And I understand some of those precinct chairs want to keep their voter roll high. And so basically what ends up happening is when people die, they don't purge the rolls. I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand what they're doing. They don't purge the rolls. Give you a case in point. I grew up in that area, right? When I came back from the military and started working and doing my whole thing, I continued right there in my own precinct area. You know whose name was right above my name? My name is Richard Andrew Johnson III. So whose name was right above mine? Richard Andrew Johnson II. My dad, right? Right? My dad passed away in 10 years. His name was still right above mine. I said, why don't you guys take my dad's name off the roll? You see, and so when we see laws come in and say, look, we need to audit the voter list, take those names off the roll, purge them from the list. That's a good thing for voting. That doesn't harm our voting rights. When we see where you say one man, one vote, and we say, let's move away from voter harvesting, that doesn't hurt my voting rights. That only strengthens me. That only strengthens my community. That lets me know I need to get out and work hard and get more people, fresh people on the rolls. That's what it does for me as a campaigner. I've been a street campaigner for decades. I've run street campaigns, I understand. And so one of the things that we're trying to do right now is maintain the integrity of the vote, make voting access more accessible, but not losing integrity of the vote, and being able to eradicate opportunities for voter fraud from our system. That only makes our system stronger and better.
And James, do you want to respond, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
Oh, I mean, we can keep moving.
Okay, cool. So kind of touching on a little bit of what you were saying, Richard, I'm really interested in kind of like figuring out areas where we do have consensus. It does seem like there's not a lot of ideas that you can get 75% of people to agree on. And I'm wondering, like an idea, like for instance, like having high voter turnout is important. Like, is that something everyone or most people agree on? Or is that not something that we necessarily have consensus on? The idea of having high voter turnout is important. Is that something that you think 75% of people agree with? Or is that something that people are like, well, maybe it's important, maybe it's not? James?
Oh, I went first last time. Do you want to go?
Cool, yeah. Equal opportunity guy, I love it. Look, 100% of the people I know want high voter turnout. I've never seen anybody who did not want to see high voter turnout, because high voter turnout means what? It means high engagement. It means high engagement, but it's also highly political, because guess what? We have two primary strong political parties. The Democrats want Democrats to turn out high. They don't want Republicans to turn out high. Republicans want Republicans to turn out high. They don't want Democrats to turn out high. You see, and so neither party wants the other party to turn out high, but everybody wants what? High voter turnout. Look, if Martin Luther King said this, he said, one cannot begin to live until he can rise above the narrow confinements of his own individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. If we could step outside of our partisan stuff, step outside of that. Yes, we want high voter turnout. Yes, we want high voter engagement, because that means people are in tune to what's going on in their communities, in their families, and in their lives. That's what we want. At the end of the day, both parties want it, but they have to step outside of their partisan hats, take those hats off, and start thinking like, number one, human beings, number two, Texans, and number three, Americans. And because James and I may have differences in opinions on how to get to the best for Texas and the best for America, but at the end of the day, we're Texans and we're Americans at the end of the day. No matter how we debate and no matter how we have differences, we want one thing. We want the best for Texas. And I genuinely believe that not just him, but organizations that fall within their purview in thinking want the best genuinely. Now, we may have a genuine difference in how to get to that best. So the answer to your question, yes, I would love to see high voter turnouts. I know most people would. I don't know anybody who does not. No one has told me, hey man, I love low voter turnout. I've never heard that in my since I was 8 years old, passing out leaflets. Everybody, we want to get the most out here, man. Get everybody out here. I've never heard anybody say low turnout.
I know someone that wants low voter turnout, and that's the state government of this state. So,
Where?
State government of Texas. Yeah. So I have heard a philosophical justification for a low voter turnout that I'm hearing more and more often, which is really only the people that are most engaged, most well-informed should be voting. Why should someone who is like, doesn't read the newspaper, barely even knows who the candidates are, why should they be voting? So if we've made it hard enough for those people not to vote, is that really such a great loss? I think even though the state of Texas will not say officially, we want low voter turnout, I think it is important to look at deeds, not words. So Northern Illinois University did a study in 2020. I think they do it annually, but I'm most familiar with the 2020 study. That it's called the cost of voting. And it tried to kind of quantify voting barriers. Like if a barrier, something that made it harder to vote, was like a tax. And so you were inflicting a cost. Rank the states in terms of cost. And can you guess which state was the hardest to vote in that study? It was Texas. Texas was 50 out of 50. And why is that? Because Texas does not have a lot of things that other states have. Texas does not have online voter registration. Texas, you have to be registered to vote in Texas the maximum number of days under federal law that is allowed anywhere in the country, 30 days. In a growing number of states, you don't even have to be registered to vote until you show up at the polls. And again, like a shrinking number of states, Texas does not allow most people or all people to vote by mail. Instead, it is limited to a small number of people. You have to be 65 and up, you have to be disabled, or you have to be away from your home county. So, whatever Texas leaders' official rhetoric is, if I look at what they've done, they want turnout to be low. I think my theme is going to be I'm a congenital pessimist, and I am pretty gloomy about the future. And so, to your question of is there consensus, on the flip side, I think everybody wants secure elections, and no one wants voter fraud. But in terms of actual what policies that I think people can agree on now, I think at the moment it's very minimal. I think at the federal level, we might get a fix to the Electoral Count Act. So that way, we might get a fix so that way a presidential election is not stolen. Maybe, but we don't know we're gonna get that yet. Here in Texas, over the last couple sessions, the only, other than minor technical tweaks to election laws, the only thing I think that I've seen recently where there was bipartisan support was the bill to create an online vote by mail tracker, which is a great reform, but it is not transformative. So I hope I'm wrong. One good thing about being a pessimist is that when you're surprised for the better. That's how I see it.
Let me just add one thing. I think, and James, I was looking at election turnout data from 2000 to 2020. And if the state of Texas really wants low voter turnout and a shrink in the amount of participation, they're really failing at it big time. Because if you look at the election turnout in 2020 to 2022, it's a 15% increase from 6 million to 11 million voters. And so that if the state really does not want the growth in voting across the state of Texas, they're really blowing it big time. Go right ahead.
But that's the numerator. In fact, even though Texas in 2020 did have the highest turnout since 1992, which was a year when 2 Texans were on the ballot, other states also increased because it was part of a national wave. So we still have a long way to go.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn over and see who here also has questions. We're going to play a little lightning round here, because, but it's kind of a big question, but we're going to get small answers. But basically, I think we can say the election that we've had so far this year, the primary election, has been sort of chaotic. From the perspective of Harris County, I've been at Central Count 3 years in a row on election night, and this was the weirdest one I've seen yet. Like, it was weird. And we saw, a lot of voter registration applications getting rejected. We saw a lot of ballots getting rejected in some urban areas and probably also in rural as well. We don't know necessarily all the numbers yet. So my question is, when you look to November, what is keeping you awake at night, if anything? Not trying to keep you guys awake at night. If you're sleeping well, that's totally fine. But like, if something is keeping you awake at night, thinking like, oh, like we experienced this in the primary, like, is it going to be worse in November? Or because we got some kinks out in the primary, everything's going to be super great in November? Like, just kind of where, like, is anything keeping you up at night for November? And if so, what? And then I will also worry about them too.
How many of y'all can have a quick drink before I do this? So some of the things that keep me up at night, one is the mail ballot rejection issue. So the positive case is that maybe the rejection rate will go down by November because there will be more time for Texans to learn about the law. Maybe the public education efforts by the state government will get better. Maybe. The case for pessimism is that general elections are higher turnout, which means a lot of people who didn't go through this process in March will have to go through it. And they are more infrequent voters, so they may just, and the higher volume may overwhelm county election officials who it's not like are getting a huge increase in staff in the first place. So we don't know, but there's reason to think that rejection rate may go up. One test from Senate Bill 1 that we have not seen yet is the poll watcher provisions. So SB 1 gave a lot of new powers and protections to partisan poll watchers. Primaries don't typically have like a huge poll watcher population. So I don't think we know yet how that's going to shake out, and it could be bad. And it could be bad because of at least one other thing that I'm worried about, which is political violence and intimidation. I remember, political violence in the United States and in Texas is not new, but I remember on the first day of early vote in the 2018 midterms, getting a report of some person who went through a neighborhood in Dallas and set a bunch of Beto O'Rourke campaign signs on fire in people's yards. And I thought, well, this isn't new in the wide arc of history, but this feels like an escalation compared to recent years. And it has obviously only gotten worse with time. And then the last thing that I'm worried about is, it's a cliche maybe at this point, but election subversion, partisan manipulation of the post-election process to try to change the outcome. Clearly, we saw that in 2020 in other states, in swing states, to try to swing the presidential election. But I think we saw a warning sign of that here when in the November 2021 election here in Texas, which was a constitutional amendment election, one of the Harris County commissioners voted not to certify the election results because of concerns over quote unquote election security. That I think is ominous for this fall, and especially on races where there's a small margin and maybe depending on, do you think something weird happened here or not? And then you have a fight in a commissioner's court over whether to certify those elections. That would be bad, not just for the election, but it will be bad for, we're heading into 2024 where in that election, we may see even worse shenanigans in the post-election process than we saw in 2020. So those are the nightmares on elections specifically. I have nightmares about Elon Musk and Twitter, but that's not really relevant here.
Well, James and I finally, James, we agree on something, man. We're both going to have the same nights.
Negative?
No, I'm not a pessimist. I'm just, what, when we talk about post-elections, and that does keep me up, and it kept me up this last election because I was supporting a candidate, and basically we didn't find out that he had fully won his race for about a week and a half. And it kept me up because of the shenanigans that was taking place, and they found 10,000 votes in Harris County. Jen, you asked me about Harris County. And matter of fact, that person, Ms. Longoria, resigned. And the clerk went on to announce he was running for mayor. So, and these were all partisan. They were all Democrats. And so, and the candidate I was supporting is the current education chairman of the education committee here now, who's a Democrat. So all these people were Democrats, but they didn't want this one guy. So they did some shenanigans back there to try to intervene in that election, but he still won anyway. Thank God for that. Only by a squeacher. So yeah, it did keep me up late at night because when you talk about issues, it doesn't just have to be one party against another party. It could be party against party, individuals against individuals. You know, when I made a decision one time to run for the United States Congress in the 18th Congressional District, I ran as a Democrat against another Democrat. And I was born and raised in the 18th Congressional District, which I'm looking at Barbara Jordan now, who that district was carved out for. And guess what? Come to find out, because they wanted the incumbent to stay in, all the forces turned against me, who's also, we're both African American, both Black, both Democrats, but then I looked at the voting harvesting that went on, and I saw, and I got evidence of individuals signing these same applications, signing these same voter cards coming in, and that's all evidenced. So it is real. It really does happen. Because if you asked us up here to raise your hand if you ever ran for public office, I'm raising my hand. So I often put myself through these types of situations so I can learn so much hands-on from it. It really does happen. That keeps me awake at night, because when we were sitting there, usually you know about 10 o'clock, no later than 10 o'clock, who won the race in Harris County. I'm sitting there waiting on results from Representative Dutton's race, and 10 o'clock gets here, next thing 1 a.m. is here, 5 a.m. is here, then 2 days go by, we still don't know. And then 3 days later, we find out, oh, in Harris County, we just found 10,000 new votes. How do you just find 10,000 votes? Better yet, how do you find 10,000 votes evenly? Not 10,113 votes. It just fell down evenly. So James and I both agree that obviously the post-election has some shenanigans that go on, and it doesn't matter. It could be party within party. And it just happened this last election cycle to be Democrat party within party. You see? And so that keeps me awake at night, looking forward to the November elections coming up. Will those kinds of things be going on when they lock the door and turn the lights out outside and leave the lights on inside? You know, do we have enough guardrails? Do we have enough elements within our apparatus, our election apparatus, to safeguard the integrity of our vote? That keeps me up at night. Do we have enough? Not do we have too much. I don't think we can have too many, because you're right about this and I'm right about this. People did die for this vote. So that I take it a little bit more personal, probably, being an African American and living in the 60s. Folks died for this right for us to vote, and we darn well ought to protect it. And we darn well ought to make sure that the integrity is not diminished, not one iota. I'm an old Army sergeant. We should fight this fight to the till to make sure that our vote is protected and nobody steals our votes and nobody finds 10,000 votes from out of the back room somewhere. I'm sorry I get a little passionate about that, but I care about voting rights to that degree.
So we're going to try to take some questions from you guys. I'm sure we can get like 2 questions. There's a microphone right over here. And then we're gonna blaze through answers so fast, you guys.
It's
gonna be.
You got a very passionate.
I know.
Topic, so
we have a lot of feelings about voting, but yeah, we're gonna move through these answers so we can get through the questions.
So this question is for Dr. Johnson. Between 2005 and 2019, over 79.5 million votes were cast here in Texas across 35 different elections. Out of those 79.5 million votes, there were only 98 instances of voter fraud that occurred according to the Heritage Foundation's database. And the question is, how do you substantiate sort of highlighting voter fraud and the need to overhaul state elections with just 98 instances of voter fraud across 35 elections in 15 years?
I think that's good, and that's according to the Heritage Foundation's data, and I think that's good. But also, I would also call your attention to look at some other data. If you look at what we found in terms of the number of deceased voters that are on the roll as of 2019 was 30 in Texas, 36,054. We were ranked number 2. Votes that were cast by deceased people from 2016 to 2019 was 289. We were ranked number 14. And then, and this data comes from the Public Interest Legal Foundation. And then non-residential addresses in their homes was 1,952. And voting in multiple states in the same election was 1,124. Now, why is that important? As I mentioned, I managed the campaign for city council, won that seat, and I went in as the chief of staff. And for 6 years, it was 3 2-year terms at the time. Houston is now 2 4-year terms, but before, back in my day, it was 3 2-year terms. And so I ran for city council, and guess what? I lost that race. I went into a runoff, lost that race by 100 votes for District B. Now, if you tell me that, and it's less than 1%. So when elections are tight, every vote counts. And even if it was one case, that's one case too many. Particularly if you're a guy like me who felt so passionate about issues, spent my life as an educator. You know who funded my campaigns? I did. I cashed in my teacher's retirement. I grew up in Pleasantville in 5th Ward in Houston. I owned a drug treatment facility trying to get boys off of drugs and get them on the right track. If one vote is wrong, I've seen people lose a race by 5 and 10 votes. But when you put your whole family out there and you put your life on the line because of what you believe in is civil rights, and if one vote is invalid, that's too many. That's how I justify it. That's how I justify it. Being a person who's been a candidate and who signed up and put my name on the ballot.
One thing I think to think about, there you are. It's not like Texas started passing voter restrictions yesterday. Texas has been doing this for a long time, of tightening the voter rolls, passing restriction here in the name of election security, passing one there. In all that time, I've never heard the proponents of those laws say, but our elections are actually getting more secure. There's always voter fraud. We always need to make it tougher and stricter. So are you telling me that not you, but I mean the rhetorical you, that in all of this time, all of the voter restrictions that Texas has passed, voter fraud has not gone down? Like, this has not gotten better? So what is the point of these restrictions if years and years after this effort began, we still need to make our elections more secure? Is it really because they're not secure? And also, if Texas truly is ranked 50 out of 50 in terms of the hardest state in the union, are we Texans like really just more corrupt than every other state in the union? That Texas is so incapable of running a clean elections that their laws always have to be stricter than others. In terms of like the one vote, it's a big deal when someone runs for office. Like I've worked on campaigns. I don't think my third grade run for class vice president probably counts to be a candidate, but people, it's a big deal to put yourself out there like that. Elections don't belong to the candidates. Elections belong to the voters. And so the cost of making sure that one illegitimate vote is not cast should not be that tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of eligible voters don't get to vote in the elections. In terms of the dead people on the rolls, Texas has long had a procedure to cleanse the voter rolls, by which death certificates are reported to county voter registrars, and they must take action within a specific period of time. Now, that process is not perfect, obviously, but it's not that Texas law just allows dead people to be on the rolls in perpetuity.
We're going to take one more question.
Thank you. First, thank you for kicking one of my stereotypes in the butt. I didn't read the flyer that carefully. I saw there was a TCRP lawyer and a TPPF lobbyist here, and I had you backwards. So that's my own stereotypes. So a large percentage of Republicans believe that the election was stolen from Trump, and there's been a lot of legislation in Republican legislators, in Republican state congresses that have restricted voting. I was wondering if you could comment on some of those and which you think are the most egregious or the most helpful.
Sorry, the Republican.
Which laws passed in different states have been the most destructive of voting rights?
The trend that I am, the trend that I am worried about now is the election audit bills, which there's one that floated up toward the end of the special sessions here in Texas last year, but they're being passed in other states now. I think these are poison pills for democracy. They're being advocated for in the name of transparency, right? Like, who can be against auditing elections? Don't you just want to like make sure there's no corruption in elections? And that has a compelling force on the face of it. Number one, there are already post-election processes through the canvass, through the certification process to detect and root out any potential voter fraud. What I think these election audit bills are meant to do, and I think you saw that clearly in Arizona, is essentially to bring to light small instances of technical errors and make them into, well, we shouldn't believe this election result. And so whatever processes are available should be used to overturn it. I think it's easy to see how this would work in the presidential election. So what I fear we will see in 2024 is that in one of these states where there's an election audit bill, so let's say Michigan goes to candidate A in the election results, but then there is a partisan audit of the election that points to, well, maybe there's a little thing here, a little thing there. Let's just throw out the entire election and award electors to candidate B, even though the evidence that the election is fundamentally corrupt and flawed isn't there. I think the other thing that it's doing is trying to separate election results from who holds power in this country. That essentially it doesn't matter if the official election results are candidate A wins, that there is in fact some other process now through these audits and a combination of judicial orders, legislative action to install candidate B instead.
And see, here's James, here's where we're separating again, you know. And thank you for your question, because I grew up as a Democrat. Spent most of my life as a Democrat. Really, they just really left me a little while ago. The Democrat Party left me. Kind of like, I know you've heard that before. You know, I support audits. I love it. I love the fact that the election audits are taking place. I was so incredibly ecstatic about that because, as I mentioned to you before, and I'm sure James has probably never grew up in a community like mine and hasn't been involved in politics as long as I have. And to see one person who's deceased stay on the voter roll for 10 years after they've deceased, isn't that, does that seem a little strange to you? Does it bother you that why carry people who are deceased on the voter roll? Why not purge it every year? You only have one little precinct. It's not like you're talking about the state of Texas. No, the state of Texas is broken down by counties, and counties are broken down by precincts. So it's not like you have this whole hard thing to do. You have a little group of folks right here in this precinct that you manage. They're voting. And so why do you have people on the roll, on your roll, like my class roll? Go back to when I was teaching. When people graduate, they don't stay on my class roll, right? You got people who graduated 10 years and they still on my class roll, along with the new people who are on my class roll. Does that make sense to you all? I don't think it makes sense to anybody in this room. Let me tell you what I learned about policy. And if you don't take away anything that I said today, or anything that James said today, take this with you. Good policy makes good sense. That's a simple one. Good policy makes good sense. Bad policy don't make no sense. If you have a policy that allows people who are dead to stay on the roll decade after decade, does that make sense? I'm gonna answer that question for you, no. In a live incident, a live event. Voting is a live, fluid event. It goes on and on and on. And it doesn't happen in a snapshot, James. You don't perfect it overnight. You continue to work on it. You say, well, this group over here says, well, they want to tighten the election rules and make it better. They should work on it every year. Every year, make it better. Life's a journey. You've heard this, life's a journey, not a destination. You're on a journey. You're not at a stopping point. When you hit a stopping point, you're no longer here. You continue, it's fluid, it's not stagnant. And so I say, yes, continue to perfect our voting process. Continue to make our voting process better. Has it made progress, James? Yes. Has it gotten all the way where it should be? No. Is there room for us to continue to perfect our voting process? All the time. So, to your point, your question, some people who are Democrats, some people who are Republicans may have feelings on both sides of the issue of the last presidential election. That did not start us to fix on voting. We've been fixing on voting all along. Right now, Texas is a border state, right? We're on the southern border. A lot of people come into our state who are undocumented, right? Is there a need for documentation in voting? What would Martin Luther King say right now? I can tell you what he would say. He would say we should protect our voting integrity at all costs because I gave my life for it. Goodman, Swanner, and Cheney would say, protect it. Make sure people can register to vote. Make sure people who are legal citizens, make sure our Constitution, make sure the 15th Amendment is intact. That's what Swanner, Goodman, and Chamberlain would say. That's what Medgar Evers would say. And me, as an African-American man, like those men who gave their life, I'm here to protect that integrity and continue to work on voting integrity. And legal people should vote and have the best possible opportunity to have their vote counted. But people here who are not legal and people who have left this world and gone on to heaven, we don't need their vote. If you're deceased, you should be audited off of the voting rolls. And anybody who understands good policy would agree with that.
As a follow-up, I gave you a bad bill in other states, but I'd like to give a positive bill that I've seen in other states that also responds to this question. Online voter registration. 42 other states have online voter registration where you can go on a website, a secure website, securely register to vote. And this was not started by a crazy liberal state like California or New York. The very first state to
You're
allow—
not from California, are you, James?
The very first state to allow online voter registration was that wacky, liberal, crazy state, Arizona. And was it yesterday? No. Was it the year before? No. Was it the year before that? No. It was 2002. There may be some people in this room that were not even born then. So you have this secure way to register to vote. It makes the voter rolls accurate because they are updated in real time. Election officials do not have to read handwriting, which is a key reason why there are mistakes in the voter rolls, is that election officials are reading people's D- level handwriting like mine. 42 other states.
Okay.
Not Texas.
I gotta shut this down, folks.
No, one more minute. Texas.
I'm gonna buy in now.
Texas may be the 50th state, but that is not happening in Texas. It is the best thing you could do to make the voting rolls more accessible and more secure, yet it was not part of the conversation last year. The direction is always toward more restriction, not more accessibility in Texas.
As you can see, there's a lot of strong feelings. This stuff is like the core and the foundation that everything rests on. I want to thank all of you guys for spending your lunchtime with us. This means the world, and we do not take it for granted that there are people who want to show up at lunchtime and talk about this stuff with us, and people on the live stream too. Thank you for watching. I want to thank the Sumners Foundation, to Lon, and I want to thank LBJ, to the dean, the faculty, Esteban, thank you for coordinating. I want to thank James, I want to thank Richard. Thank you so much for bringing all your passion and all of your expertise and your life experiences, and for bringing all of that and sharing with all of us today. I am going to welcome up to the stage LBJ student Aaron Gonzalez to give some closing remarks, please.
Thank you so much for the rich and robust discussion. Definitely appreciated it. Definitely learned a lot. So thank you. As was mentioned, I'm a first-year student in the MPAF program. I'm also a volunteer organizer while I'm in school with JOLT Initiative, the largest Latino voter engagement nonprofit in the state of Texas. And while it's totally essential that we consider the future of voting, we think it's also important to remember that voting gives voice to our shared community and our experience. It allows us to come together and have these type of discussions. As you leave today, we still have some food in the back, so please feel free to grab some. And we hope that you're going to think about your experiences and the issues that mean most to you, and think about how you can connect with someone new and, strengthen our democracy. So thank you. Have a great day.
Good. I'm just gonna check to see if the live stream is caught up.